G'day, Pat and Ruthie here, coming to you from the Victorian High Country. Well, Ruthie, you know, before I came down here, people used to say to me, there's only two good things about Victoria. One of them is these little green cans, and the other thing is the four-wheel drive tracks. And to those people I say, that's supposed to be a bad thing. But Ruthie, you're looking a little bit worried, mate. What's up?
Oh, mate, just before I left, I mean, I had the worst news possible. I heard that my cousin Darcy
Darcy.
and his mate Wombat,
Oh,
which
dear.
is worse, are down here looking for work somewhere in the high country. So, I mean, obviously they've exhausted all the dulkiers up in Queensland. They're down here. I hope it's a big place and I hope we don't run into them, that's all.
Oh dear.
Oh.
Well, we better go bush so we can evade Darcy and Wombat.
That's a great idea, Pat.
Time to meet the crew who'll be steering us through the high country. Pat Callanan, Patsky to his mates, editor of Four Wheel Drive Monthly and father of Otis, the Blue Monster Suzuki. Of course, they couldn't go without Ruthie. He told his handbrake he was going down the shop. Good luck, Ruthie. This is Ant-Man, our Victorian correspondent, who's going to show us around some of his favourite and secret four-wheel drive destinations. And flying the ARB flag on the trip is Mark Lowmount Lowry. Like most blokes from ARB, he's a fair dinkum four-wheel drive nut. And from sunny Queensland is Cooper Tyres rep Damien Rennick. Snapping the fantastic pics you'll see in Four Wheel Drive Monthly magazine is Rob Cox. That's him picking guitar in the background. Peter Watts is our cameraman. So thankfully this is the only time you'll see his ugly mug. Nice pictures, but... And these are the boys' mounts for the trip. The brand spanking new Nissan Patrol, decked out for serious touring by ARB. Next up is Otis, Four Wheel Drive Monthly's hardcore project vehicle. ARB also sent their Prado along for a taste of some tough high country tracks. And Otis wouldn't go anywhere without his Queensland sidekick, Milo. The wild boys have mounted up and head off into bushranger country. It was raining. Of course it was raining. This is Victoria. Kick-off's about 400 k's out of Melbourne. This area was called Omeo by the Aboriginals. It was settled by Europeans as early as 1835, originally as cattle breeding country. And in 1851, the Reverend W.B. Clark discovered gold here. This is amazingly rugged mountain country. To give you an idea of just how rugged, the 80-kilometre journey between the nearby townships of Burnsdale and Ansay was a 4-day trek on horseback, or a 9-day tramp on foot, which explains why, even 12 years after gold was discovered, the population only reached 600. There was no huge rush by the standards of some of the other goldfields, but Livingston Creek did attract its fair share of miners and the attendant bushrangers. After a bit of a look around and stocking up the fridge, the Victorian High Country adventure finally gets the scent of dirt roads in its snorkel. They left Omeo on the Birrigan Road, heading towards Dargo, then turned right onto the Birrigan track. This is where the track gets a bit skinny and steep. Time to slow down and lock it into low range and let the transfer case do all the work. The boys' 7-day trek is going to take us through some of the prettiest mountain country you're ever likely to find in Australia. This is the country that inspired Banjo Paterson to write The Man from Snowy River. And if Banjo came back here today, he'd probably tell you that nothing has changed in 100 years, except maybe our little convoy of four-wheel drives. In fact, I reckon he'd be driving one himself. Let's have a look at where the boys will be taking us. After kicking off at Omeo, they're going to snake their way past Dog's Grave and on into the town of Dargo. From there, they'll head up high above the snowline to the famous Blue Rag Track, a ridgetop trail not for the faint-hearted. But now, hitch up your skirts, ladies. It's time to get your feet wet on the first of many river crossings. This crossing is similar to most of the river crossings you'll find in the high country. A pretty firm stony base with easy access and exit points. They'll be getting into some more exciting river action as we get further into the mountains. They're also expecting to run into some pretty slick tracks, so they made sure the trucks were all well shod.
on this trip we've been lucky enough to road test the new Cooper STT. It's a new muddy, in fact brand new on the market. These 3 sets that we're testing were actually air freighted out from the States just for us to use, so we're the first in the country to take them for a play in the bush. Now, we've got Damien Rennick here from Cooper Tyres. Thanks for joining us, Damo.
G'day, Pat.
And Damo's going to explain some of the new features about this tyre. So, what is so new about it, Damo?
Pat, in the past, Radial Tyres body plies have travelled directly from bead to bead at a 0-degree angle. Cooper, with the new STT, are using their traditional 2-ply body, but have added a third or protective ply at an 8-degree angle to give a greater resistance to tearing in the sidewall area.
I noticed that there are these cuts in each of the tread blocks. What do they do?
Pat, sipes are not new technology to tyres. They've been using them in highway and all-terrain tyres for quite some time. They actually add greasy road grip. So what we've got here is a mud tyre that should give good grip on the road.
So you're telling me that we've got a mud tyre that actually handles well on road?
Well, the guys who've been using the tyres for this week have all commented on how much better they feel on the road.
Well, let's go and test them out, Damo. Well, we've stumbled on some typically delightful high country weather now. The tracks have already turned to slush. Now, in these sort of conditions, we've dropped the tyre pressure just to give ourselves a little bit better traction and a little bit better road holding. But the other thing you've got to think of when you're trekking through the high country is to have a nice, well-balanced vehicle. Now, I've got a problem with Otis in that I'm a big fat bugger and I'm sitting in the front on the right-hand side, so it sort of unsettles my vehicle. What I needed to do is put a bit of ballast in the back and sit that over the axle, because that's the best place to carry your heavy loads. So while in Victoria, I found a nice little bit of ballast. Some of the local lager. Well, as you've seen on this trip, we've had some pretty damn awful weather, but I've been sleeping high and dry in the new ARB rooftop tent. Now, this is another 4-wheel drive monthly exclusive. We are the first media outlet in the world to test this thing, so let's give it a crack.
The ARB rooftop tent is a traditional roof topper. It's a compact unit that only takes up half your roof rack, leaving plenty of storage room upstairs for other lightweight gear. Just pull down the ladder, whack up the awning. G'day, mate. And roll out your sleeping bag. Now, how easy is that? When you go bush, it's really great to get away from civilization, but you can't afford to completely isolate yourself. In summertime, you need to be aware of bushfire dangers, for instance. And in the mountains, anytime, you should monitor the weather regularly. Getting caught in a blizzard is not a pleasant experience. So it was that our motley crew heard there was a possibility of snow. A quick change of plans, and the search is on for fresh powder.
Well, how's this? It was about 41 degrees 2 days ago in Albury when we drove through. Now, look at this, snow on the ground. This is supposed to be the middle of summer. How good is the high country? Get it up. Don't you love cold snow?
There are all sorts of hazards in the mountains. Without warning, the boys stumbled across two of them, in the form of Ruthie's long-lost cousin Darcy and his little mate Wombat. Looks cold down there, little fella. Blue Rag is a one-lane goat trail all the way with few passing opportunities and some pretty exciting steep drop-offs. Concentration and a steady approach are the key. On a clear day, you can see for miles. But even in the clouds, this is special country. On these single-lane tracks, you've got to take it slow and steady for a few good reasons. First, too much speed can cut the track up, and they don't bring dozers out here too often. And the gates have been locked on too many four-wheel drive adventures because of irresponsible drivers causing damage to tracks in the bush. So you'll be doing the right thing by yourself. Also, you never know what's around the corner, with few options for getting out of the way of oncoming traffic, where you could find yourself amongst a mob of cattle having a feed on the long paddock.
Well, at Australian Four-Wheel Drive Monthly, we don't do our campfire entertainment by halves. Tonight, we're lucky enough to have the dual Australian whip-cracking champion and a fantastic bush poet to boot. Noel Cutler, take it away.
Thanks, Pat. Now, some of you blokes, well, I don't think many of you would have had cattle on the road from time to time, but the drovers that did had problem with the cows and with calves, because the cow would want to come back for the calf that was laying down, being a little bit weaker. So we had to keep them both going. So the drover had a crack that will actually involve three cracks. One was for the cow out the front, one for the calf, and that was for that bloody healer who always got in between them. That's called a Sydney flash. And this is how it looks with two hands. And then we stagger it. You know, every time I do that, it reminds me of a demonstration I did at a little place called Jugiong up the Hume Highway. And like all good whip crackers my age, we ended up in the pub afterwards. Well, the appreciative crowd in that little town had just bought me another beer. When up walked this craggy-faced local, whom I took for a pioneer. He said, "I seen you crack them whips today, and a mighty fine job you done. But can you use those whips on horseback, say to turn a wild bull at full run?" Now, as it came to pass, as a lad, this bloke was a stockman of some renown, who rode the high plains in the late autumn time to bring the cattle down. Well, the challenge was laid, and with me pride at stake, I tipped back me hat and said, "Mate, I can crack whips to the side and in front, and even above me head. You get me a horse who's whip broken in and I'll show you a thing or two." And with a nod of his head, he returned to his stool. And I knew what I had to do. A two-hand staggered Sydney flash aboard a galloping steed should prove to the old codger once and for all I was a man of special breed. The new day dawned after a restful sleep, alone in my hotel bed. While out in the yard, the old fellow stood with an Arab that looked purebred. I chose two whips, 6 foot in length, 16 plat rawhide, and with boots, belt buckle, and a kuba in place, I strolled downstairs and outside. There was money changing hands as the crowd gathered round, and I really began to think. And I'm sure, as I straddled that well-muscled gelding, he gave his owner a wink. A cattleman's crack above the horse's head, just to see if the beast was alert. Then deep in his flanks I drove my heels and rode off through the newly ploughed dirt. In a few short strides he was at full pace, and I placed the reins in my mouth. And with a whip in each hand I let out a crack. That the folks would hear down south. With my knees I turned him and galloped downhill towards the cheering crowd. Towards the cheering crowd! Thought you'd all gone to sleep. And with one last rendition of the Sydney Flash, I thought I'd done myself proud. I threw back my head and reined to a halt. The old fellow stood there and stared. He'd seen a bloke on horseback today crack whips like he never dared. He shook my hand and shouted a beer and gave me an approving grin. Then got off his stool, prodded his mate and faced me chin to chin. What I seen today was pretty good. And it must take skill, courage and brains. But before you go, would you step outside? Because you've left your teeth in me reins.
Approaching a mob like this, first up, come to a stop so the drivers can see that you're not going to upset their herd. They might push them out of the way for you, or let you push your own way through, in which case, take a straight line through the mob at a steady, slow pace, keeping an eye out for calves separated from their mothers. Nuts. That's what you'll find in Dargo. Walnuts. Everywhere you look there are walnut trees, and they make a mean walnut cake. They have a walnut festival every year at Easter when hundreds of walnut devotees make their pilgrimage and swell the town's population to bursting point. They say that 10% of Victoria's walnuts come from Dargo. Don't know how many walnuts that is, but the boys were certainly impressed. Too hilly for cropping, the first Europeans staked out cattle farms around Dargo. The first one was a huge 8,000 acre holding. Not a bad little block. There was some gold found in the area, but not much, so it ran out. So the locals were left alone to wander around on their big acres, planting walnut trees presumably. Today, Dargo is a pretty place to visit, and the Dargo pub is a warm and friendly stopover, especially if you need to thaw out after a few cold days on the track. They serve up a fair dinkum country feast, and out back are some of the most awesome alpine cabins the boys had ever seen. Very cosy and warm and very inviting. Make a point of dropping in to say g'day to mine hosts Scott and Jody Hamill.
So I'll do that.
If history's your thing, take the time to have a wander through the Dargo Museum. It's a fascinating whistle stop, and the curator, Brian Madigan, is a virtual walking encyclopedia on the pioneering and mining history of the district.
Ah, look at that one. That's my size. I'll go that. See the bottles? Yeah. Drank all them on my
From Dargo, The boys now head out along the valley floor before taking on the higher peaks of Billy Goat Bluff. Back on the track, and the boys are about to encounter one of the more exciting river crossings of the trip.
Well, there are about a gazillion water crossings here in the high country, and every single one of them is a little bit different. Now, we all know that the smart thing to do when you're doing a water crossing is to walk it first. Of course, then you can see the water flow and how coarse or how soft it is on the bottom of the river. But I can't convince any of the guys in our crew here to do the water crossing. See, the problem is, even though it's the middle of summer here, I reckon it's 10 degrees outside, probably about 2 degrees in the water, so no one wants to go in, which is probably fair enough. So we're going to send Otis in first. We've got the nice high snorkel on this vehicle, and we're going to chuck a Michelle Sachs water blind over the front of the vehicle so that no water rushes up under the bonnet here and damages electricals or anything like that. So let's chuck the blind on. These water blinds are a hell of a lot better than the old blue tarps and ropes that we used to wrap around the fronts of our vehicles. They've got elastic top and bottom, so they give your car a nice snug fit. This one's got a pouch here at the front, so you can chuck your snatch strap in there. And they've even got holes down here, so you can pull your winch hook out. Now, come around here, Watsy. The way that you secure them to your vehicle is actually through these simple clasps here. You wrap them up around your rear view mirror. Too easy.
Now, what Pat hasn't told you is that he's never seen this crossing before, and he was more than a little concerned about getting Otis through. As we all know, Pat knows his truck's capabilities, but this crossing's a little out of the ordinary, and he was being guided across by a couple of shaky locals whose directions were, to say the least, questionable. But with a firm hand on the reins and a big bucket of off-road experience, Pat guided Otis through like a champion. Billy Goat Bluff. What a great name. Now we know where it came from. For the next few Ks, it's low range to keep the heat out of the brakes and to maintain traction. Up here, a few Ks means a few hours. This is glorious, true alpine country. The air's clear, crisp and clean, and it's usually cold. And everywhere you look is another brilliant photo opportunity. Up in this high country, the weather keeps you on your toes. Storms and big winds bring down big trees, and every now and then a big one will fall right across the track. Now, there are a couple of ways of getting through. A chainsaw could do the job, but this one was just too big. So an earlier convoy built a ramp using the fallen tree's branches. Even with a bit of suspension lift, the Prado managed to belly out on the woodpile. Check out the damage of the factory side steps. A decent set of steel steps would have had the Prado sliding over this obstacle unscathed. But it was down to Pat and Otis to get the Prado out of trouble. Even though he's using a snatch strap, Pat takes it easy to tow the stuck truck over the hump. Too much pedal here could cause a lot more damage. No real harm done, just a little bit of bush panel beating by Low Mount Lowry, and it's all sweet. Remember that we said Ant-Man was going to show us some of his favourite secret spots? He'd been here before with some pretty hardcore trucks and he reckoned no one could get through this mud hole unassisted. Don't ever say dare to Patsky. High in the saddle, Pat pushes Otis gently down to the edge. Then a spur in the flanks and in he dives. This is a pretty steep exit and according to Ant-Man is where even the most hardcore muscle machines have come unstuck. Okay, let's go to the video rep. It's over 1.5 meters deep here, but Otis has serious clearance and Pat's momentum maintains a good bow wave that keeps the Vital Electrics dry for those few critical seconds. Yeah, I'd say that's a try. Come on, Ruthie. You're not seriously going to take Milo in there, are you? Oh, you're kidding. Oh, you're kidding. Oh, go Milo. Oh, yes, go Milo. Oh, bugger. Let's see that again.
That's full of water, that's what slowed me up.
I hope those door seals are tight, Ruthie. I hope your Sid chromes didn't get damp, Ruthie.
Oh, it's this one.
For those masochists among us who want to know where this challenge is, this is Little River at what's called Dairy Farm near Conglomerate Gap. And if you're dopey enough to want to try it yourself, make sure you let Four Wheel Drive Monthly magazine know how you got on. After the mud bath, the circus headed back towards Dargo before striking off to Gold Country around Grant and Talbotville on their way towards Wonnangatta Station. Mount Pleasant, they called it, but you've really got to doubt if it was anywhere near Pleasant. Probably that's why they changed the name to Grant. This was a true boom and bust gold town, and the conditions for miners and their families must have been horrific. Almost always cold, and with very little of what you could call comfort, these poor buggers certainly lived a hard life. When gold was found in Omeo and Dargo, The diggers started searching all around the area, and the first colour here was panned in the Crooked River. Initially it was pretty average pickings, but soon some big producing reefs were uncovered and the town really boomed. In 1865 there were 20,000 people living in Grant. Then the gold got harder and harder to dig up until it wasn't worth the effort. In 1902 there were only a few families left, and by 1916 the town was deserted. Down on the flats it wasn't so cold, and the level ground presented a good opportunity for the boys to give their trucks the once-over, and for our bush mechanic Ruthie to do some mid-trip maintenance.
On this high country trip we've been running through all sorts of deep water and mud, and I mean the underbody of the car's basically been sloshing around in slop most of the trip. And I'm not just referring to Victoria here, it has been known, you know, that we've had slop in Queensland too. We usually call it VB. The thing about that sort of running is that it's going to get into all the moving joints. Grit, water, stuff like that, it's just got to. There's no way it can stay out, not long term, especially in an old truck like Milo. And before I run home, it's imperative that I pump grease in and get the crap out. It's the only way to do it, because if you leave that grit and rubbish sitting in your uni joints and your tail shaft and everywhere else, it'll just act like a grinding paste and grind it away. Now, before you get underneath your truck, just make sure, please, that you've got it jacked up well and truly. Don't do it just on the jack. Sit it on a big block of timber if you can. Trust me, I wouldn't get underneath the thing unless I knew it couldn't fall on me. The main area of concern for me with my older truck, and really it's the same thing for all of you, is the fact that I'm down here diving in and out of the mud. The drive shaft is turning all the time. The universal joints are turning, churning away. When they're moving, they're very capable of sucking in the mud and the grit. That's, you know, and it's all sitting in there, just waiting to cause damage. It's just like valve grinding paste floating around inside there. And of course the things are turning constantly with lots of torque on them. So what you need to do, or what I need to do right now anyway, especially if I'm going to make that 2,000 k's back to Queensland, is get as much of that out as I can. Now, the best way to do that is to, first of all, clean the grease nipples. There's nothing like playing with nipples under the truck, I always say, especially when you've got the handbrakes top. You might not mention that to her actually if you're talking to her. I don't even remember taking this one. Probably good I didn't take a fishnet stockings though. Wouldn't get much clean with those. Anyway, we'll get these nipples nicely polished. You don't want to be pushing dirt into the joint, do you? This is my grease gun. I've got it full of Penrite Extreme Pressure, which is a good underbody grease. There are different types of greases. Make sure you've got the right one. You don't want to be sticking a drum brake suitable grease and using it in your disc brakes, things like that. Greases are different purposes. Have a look, see what you got. This is one I need for this. Right, now here we go. You watch this. Oh, push a bit of grease in there, and with a bit of luck, there it is. I don't know if you can see that, but we've got water being forced out by the grease. Now that water just would have stayed in there. Just have a look here and you'll see on this sliding shaft, you can see it moving with the pressure of the grease. And any minute now, there it goes, look at that. Now the water was trapped in there. Obviously it's dirty water, it's got grit in it, it's just been forced out by the grease. Going to do that same thing. I hope I don't get too much grease on my Mr. Swagman swag here. Do the same thing to the uni joints. As soon as we find the nipple, give it a bit of a clean. And you can imagine how much damage that dirty water would do there in a 2,000 k trip home. Now, I can hear it. I can hear the rubbish being pushed out. And there it is again. Well, there you go. Look at that. All that dirty grease is laden with grit and water. And that's just going to eat away the uni joint, the tail shaft, whatever, especially on a couple of 1,000k road trip home if it's left in there. Best thing to do is get the vehicle up safely, force it out with the grease gun. Anyway, just don't let the handbrake know that I use this top, eh? Thanks.
It pays to always keep your eyes open on the track, because you never know what's going to jump out in front of you.
After those ferocious bushfires of 2003 swept through the Victorian high country, a lot of the road signs actually got burnt down. So navigating through the high country isn't as easy as it used to be. But we're okay, we've got our Victorian correspondent Anthony Kilner on board, and he's been leading the trip on this instance. Now Ant-Man, what are some of the tips and tricks, I suppose, of navigating through the high country?
Well, one of the problems we encounter is a lot of track realignments. The fires cause a lot of damage. We get, Parks Victoria coming through, changing the tracks because of rock slides, landslides, the lovely weather we get up here in the high country. So a good map, a couple of bits of equipment, a Roma, a pencil and a compass, and really that's all you need, and you'll find your way through the high country pretty well.
Now when you say a good map, Ant, what would you class a good map scale-wise, I suppose?
Well, scale-wise to start with, I guess your general purpose map, which covers a really large area, is good just for quick navigation, planning, going from there. What I sort of prefer to use these days is a topo map like this one, which is 1 in 50,000. It gives you a lot more detail, a lot more contour lines. You can trace yourself around hills, and while they're quite old and dated, most of the tracks are still there apart from those realignments, which is why you need them to have a few mapping skills.
Now I noticed you've got the GPS here, but you've also got the manual gear. You wouldn't just rely on the GPS though, would you?
I try not to, but you still need some sort of mapping skills to be able to understand a map and where you're going as far as heights and all that go. So I use the GPS as a really quick reference to plot myself on a map, and then I know exactly where I am straight away, and it makes life very easy for travelling.
Okay, should we plot where we are at the moment?
I reckon that's a pretty good thing. Okay Pat, I already know I've set the GPS up to suit the map that we've got here with the Australian Geodectic 66, which is what this map is based on. Now what I'm going to do is plot where we are on the course. The way I remember it is you've got to go across before you can get up. And so what we'll do now is we'll plot a reference on here using the bottom digits to start with, which is 5867. So this is my grid square down here, 5867. So I'll put my finger there. Our other position is 0505. Now basically what I'm looking for now, we're in that square there, and then we trace a line down, and that gives us our main square that we've got to work from. Grabbing the Roma, you put that Roma on the square that you're on, and then you work on the next digit. So in this case 788 goes a lot of detail that you don't really need, but I'll work that out as close enough to 8, and then our bottom figure, which is 69, is close enough to 7. So I'll set that up on 7 there, bring us back to 8 here, and that plots us using the red dot right on this intersection, where for us, we've come to this junction. We now have to turn left to head to tonight's camp, and that's it. It's that easy.
Good stuff. You cooking again tonight, mate?
I guess I probably will.
Lovely. Let's go. Well, Ruthie, I see you've made a few changes, a few slight changes to the back of old Milo.
Yeah.
What's happened since we last saw it, mate?
Minor modifications, mate. Yes, all in the interests of improving the vehicle beyond its already incredible capabilities, of course. No, well, as you know, mate, I mean, on the last trip, I think we had the doors fly open 2 or 3 times.
Yep.
This poor old girl's been used so much, you know, that she was just getting very loose and very rusty all around the back. I had to do something about that. So I went and saw my mate Eki, and I picked up a short wheelbase tub, and I picked up these panels, which are all from a pretty rare station wagon. I think they only made 40 series station wagons for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. I cut a couple of barn doors, rusted barn doors in half, and made the tailgate, and so I've turned it into a station wagon. It's about 700 mil shorter. But while I was at it, while I had the whole back off, I built a steel frame for inside. It's not so much a roll cage, it's just a stiffening device. And on this trip, it's really paid off. You can feel the whole back of the truck's nice and tight, nice and short. And I've got this incredible departure angle happening now too, which is, you know, very useful on this trip.
Giddy up. Now, Ruthie, I notice you've also made a few mid-trip modifications. What's the story here?
I didn't make that, mate. Mark Lowry sat down with a carton of beer and knocked it up. Took him 6 or 7 hours and most of the carton, but it's a beautiful job. We knocked it off unloading some timber, so, you know, you get that.
It's a masterpiece, mate. Now, I suppose you'd say the whole back of your vehicle has now been stiffened up.
It is that tight, it's not funny, you know. I mean, there's really nothing like a tight rear end to stiffen things up. All around the high country they found gold, just like lots of other places in Australia. And I always carry a gold pen. I just like a bit of prospecting. You never know what you're going to find. But just a few tips for people who haven't had a go at this and want to try. A few things you should look for. Normally you're looking for some sort of quartzite like this. It's all over the place here in Talbotville because of course this was a mining town. Another thing, you know, you can buy all sorts of different pans. These plastic ones came out a few years ago, and even though I've always had an old metal one, I'm really sold on these. They're a lot easier on the fingers. What else should you be doing? Well, most people seem to think that you go panning, you come down to the creek, you scoop up some dirt from where you're standing and off you go. Not really, no. The old guys were pretty cluey. They would have done most of this. There might be a bit of fresh stuff come through, but you never know what you're going to find when you gold mining. The best chance always is going to be on the outside of a creek. Alluvial gold is washed down from a mother lode somewhere, and because of the heaviness of it and the centrifugal force, it always gets forced to the outside on corners. What you have to do is not pan in the easiest possible spot, but go and get some dirt from the outside of the bend. We just went over there and tucked into a couple of places here on the upper bank where my imagination, as much as anything, tells me that that's probably where the river went at some stage. Other things, you know, you look for a bit of a break in the ground that might have trapped the dirt a little bit more, you know, a bit of a rock face coming out. Quite often it's good to dig up around old trees, things like that, because that would have turned the dirt over. The growing action of the tree turns the dirt over. You'll be pulling dirt from near the surface that's probably come from 10, 15 feet down. Gold sits there forever, it never goes away. There's lots of ways to find the spot where you think the good dirt might be. When I was in Lightning Ridge, you know, there was all sorts of crazy things, from waiting for a nice coloured parrot to land in a tree and then digging under that hole, to waiting for a full moon, taking all your clothes off and running around with an opal in each hand saying, find me, find me. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to go for gold. I'd suggest outside of the creek, dig a bit of a hole, pan away. We've plucked a bit of trace from here, there and a few other places. Not surprising really, it's gold country all the way through here. I don't know what we've got in here. Could be good. Oh yeah, this looks okay. Come and have a look at this.
On this stretch of track, Pat and Ruthie scooted on ahead. But poor old Lowmount got himself stuck on a slippery bit of hill. Time to give the worn winch a workout. Lowmount never goes into the bush without protection. First up, make sure you always use a good pair of rigger's gloves whenever you're handling cable. The next piece of protection is for the tree. In the old days, the winch cable was simply wrapped around the tree trunk, more often than not causing the tree to be ring-barked and ultimately killing it. A tree trunk protector should be standard equipment in any winching kit. Here, Lowmounts pop the winch into freespool to run the cable out. Now he's doing something slightly different to increase the safety factor in this recovery procedure. Instead of using the winch hook, he's actually coupled the cable securely through the rated bow shackle. Simply, this takes one piece of hardware with the potential to fail out of the equation. The last bit of preparation is to drop on the winch dampener, which is designed to stop the cable from whipping through the air in the event of something letting go under load. Now, Lowmount's handling this recovery solo, so he has to control both the winching operation and be in control of his vehicle. Now he's letting the winch do all the work to get him out of trouble. After seeing Lowmount's troubles, Ant-Man looks for a different approach and uses a bit more throttle to get him up the slippery bit.
If you fancy a little bit of steep terrain driving, then come to the Vic High Country and you'll be in absolute off-roader's heaven. But there are a few things to think about when you're in this country. When you're travelling down hills, it's best to have first gear low range. That basically takes the stress off your brakes. But if it's a slippery track or if it's particularly steep, then you may have to actually tap the accelerator a little bit, because first gear low range may actually be too low. Now, when you're travelling up the hills, again, first gear low range may not actually be the go. You might want to try second gear low range, because that doesn't put so much direct power through to the wheels and you'll have less chance of wheel spin. But generally in the high country, it's best to just take it easy on these tracks. You don't want to go too quickly, and if you think the track is a little bit above your skill level, give it a miss and come back another day. Keep the shiny side up.
Ruthie panning for gold, and Darcy and Wombat trying to hijack the convoy for a $2 toll. Some blokes will do anything to make a buck. On tracks like these, it's a good idea to drop your tyre pressures by about 10% to soften the impact of sharp edges on your treads. You'll run less risk of staking and puncturing expensive rubber, and it's kinder to the track.
Well folks, this is what the Wonnangatta River looks like after a couple of days of solid rain and even some snow on the higher peaks. She's flying fairly damn quickly. This crossing here is on the Herne Spur track, and the problem with it is it's not so much the height of the creek, because it's only really come up to here on me, but the problem is the flow. Now we've got a few lower vehicles, certainly lower than mine here. We've got the Prado, we've got the Patrol. Those have got about, you know, roughly 1.5 2-inch lifts on them, and even Ruthie's truck isn't too huge. So the slab-sided nature of these vehicles as they cross is going to mean that the water is going to gather up the side of them and try and push them downstream. So it presents a real challenge to us as four-wheel drivers. What we're going to do is we'll probably connect some winch extension straps or snatch straps to the vehicles to secure them after my vehicle has gone through, and take it from there. But this looks like fun.
In preparation for Pat's crossing, Damo's setting up a tree trunk protector just upstream. That way, if Otis loses his footing, they'll have an anchor point ready to hook onto, saving valuable time.
Well, lucky me, I'm first in, folks. I'm in the Susie. Got the rear locker on, I've left the front locker off so that I've got some steering effort. So off we go. Let's give it a crack. Into gear. Bit of a bow wave. Oh, she's around the top of the bonnet there. We're going down. We've gone down about a metre or two. Whoa! And out we come. Well, that thing has some serious flow on it. The whole vehicle moved about 2 metres sideways. And this car doesn't have a lot of a side profile on it. So this is going to be very, very interesting.
It was pretty obvious that the other vehicles with such broad side profiles were going to meet with grief if they tried to cross entirely under their own steam. So Pat decided to turn Otis into an Henri tow truck and lend a much needed hand. Lowmount's taken the precaution of finding an entry point further upstream to allow for some sideways travel in his crossing attempt. Now keep a close eye on the back of the Prado as it gets close to the far bank. This water is running fast and hard. Oh, look out! Nearly got away. Just watch how these blokes are struggling. What's happening here is that as soon as the straps hit the water, they're being dragged downstream, and it's taking 3 big blokes to drag them against the current. This gives you an idea of the pressure on the side of the vehicles as soon as they go under. On these sort of tricky crossings, it's the only time that we recommend not wearing a seatbelt when you're off-roading. If things do go wrong, you'll need to get out of your truck fast. Talk about the adventures of Milo and Otis. Here goes the old green battleship being towed by the little blue tugboat. And yet another crossing of the Wonongatta River. While some of these were pretty deep crossings, they weren't terribly wide, so by keeping momentum up to maintain a good bow wave, the boys were able to keep their engine bays dry. Any wider though, and they'd have all had to take extra precautions. You'll notice that the Patrol is the only vehicle wearing a bra. That's because it was the only one without a snorkel. What an amazing vista. Ant-Man promised spectacular scenery, and when the boys arrived at Wonongatta Valley, his promise was kept. The boys are visiting Wonongatta Station Homestead. The station was set up as a cattle property around 1860. The graveyard tells some sad tales of how tough life was in the high country back then. Eventually, the station came under management of one Jim Barclay, who hired a bloke named John Bamford as cook and roustabout. One day, the mailman discovered the body of Jim Barclay with a bullet in his back. John Bamford was nowhere to be found. In this stunning valley, a million miles from anywhere, you'll find dozens of magic camping spots nestled along the banks of the river. It's a favourite long weekend destination for four-wheel drive clubs and enthusiasts, but there's plenty of room for everyone without camping on top of one another.
I've loved this Victorian high country. This is just such a beautiful place to come and go for a drive. The tracks are great, the country's magnificent, and of course the overall feeling is that incredible sense of freedom you get from being able to get out and enjoy the Aussie bush. But increasingly, I'm finding that more and more tracks that I've been using since I was a kid are being shut down in the name of saving the environment. To me, this is the most ridiculous concept on earth. They just don't understand, probably because they don't get out and have a look at the bush often enough, that the environment is so much stronger than machines or anything else. It will come back. It will come back so fast it's not funny. In the meantime, we need to keep the country open so that people can go out and enjoy what is essentially their birthright. If you're an Australian, it is part, I would have thought, of your basic inheritance that we have this large, wonderful country and we can all go out and enjoy it. Not pay fees and fines and bits and pieces all over the place. Just go out and enjoy it. Take care of it, look after it. But look at this. I mean, the McAllister Four-Wheel Drive Club went to a lot of effort to build an incredible little toilet here in the high country. All over Australia, clubs are doing things like that, looking after the environment. You know what? These people who want to keep us out of our own country, they really give me the shits.
That night, with Ant-Man cooking up a storm, the boys relaxed with a few cold ones. After spending a chilly night at Wonnangatta Station, the crew snaked their way back up the mountain toward their final destination, Craig's Hut. After jumping off the Zika spur track, our team headed towards Howard Hut. Now here's where the murder mystery of Wonnangatta Station starts to thicken. The search party that recovered the body of Jim Barclay accidentally discovered John Bamford right here at Howard Hut, buried under a pile of wood with a bullet in his head. Until now a suspect, he turned out to be a second victim. There were plenty of theories put up about who done it, but that's where the mystery remains. Howard Hut was built in the early 1900s from timber slab with shingle roof. Today its place in our heritage is being protected with an outer cladding of corrugated iron. There are plenty of old huts like this around the high country, but they should always be respected and only ever used for shelter in emergencies. So the boys begin the final leg of their trek, up towards Craig's Hut. It wasn't long though before trouble came a-calling, in the form of Milo with a limp.
Milo's perfect reputation ruined. Damn.
I would say that the nut has come off.
Well, here we are on the second last day in the high country. We're getting fairly close to Mansfield, and all day I've had this problem with the brakes. It's been very minor. It just felt as if it needed to be pumped up a little bit, and I've been looking at the brake fluid and it's been okay, and I thought, oh, there's something fairly minor going on here, not to worry about it. But what's happened, of course, is that the bearings come undone, the nuts holding it on. We've just found a couple of bits of shrapnel in there, which is hopefully the bearing locking ring. I don't know why that's happened. I haven't looked at these since before Tasmania, so she's done about 10,000 very hard Ks and lots of water, although there's no water in there at this stage that might have caused the damage, but it's not to mean it didn't. At this stage it looks like we might be able to recover it. Not really sure. At least this outer bearing is, whilst not good, we could hopefully grease it up. We can possibly get enough adjustment to maybe get into Mansfield and get some parts. But before we do that, we've got to clean it all up because there's bits of shrapnel here. Once again, I'm not really sure where that's from, so it's a bit of a worry. The inner bearing could be completely RS at this stage, but of course we've got to pull it off to have a look. To do that means the caliper's got to come off, brakes have to be bled, all sorts of things. Could be a really good time to pitch the tent and break out the beer, but we'll see how we go. Well, bit of a bummer this. The seal is completely RS, obviously. That's what's letting the grease out. The bearings are okay, I mean they're not great. Good enough to make the wheel go round. The real shame of it is, of course, that I've got a whole box full of new bearings and seals and whatnot, and I traded them at the Dargo Hotel for a couple of cartons. I don't believe it. Oh dear. Alright, well we'll hook in and fix what we've got. And then I'll cry. What we've got here is the inner hub seal. It holds the grease in, stops it from going into the brakes catching fire, which is basically the situation we nearly had here on the hill when Rob went running for the fire extinguisher. The seal's stuffed. You can see it's come away, it's just not sealing. What we're going to do is a bit of a Mark Lowry trick, and let's hope it'll work. It certainly seems like a good idea. We're going to fill the back of the seal with Silastic and then set the old seal back into it, and if nothing else it's going to help keep some of the grease in. And then what we'll do is, when I put the hub back together, we'll just grease the bearings, nothing more. We'll put a lot of grease into the bearings, but we won't bother filling the hub up, and that way, with a little bit of luck, the wheel will go round. Here goes.
Don't they always say trouble comes in threes? An enthusiastic bunch of helpers you got there, Ruthie. Looks like you're in for a long night.
Well, it's a couple of hours later, and as you can see, the sun's gone down. We're still working away here. Problem was, even though the bearings were salvageable, usable to get us out of here, the two nuts that hold the bearings, hold the wheels on, basically, hold the hubs on, were completely stuffed. The threads chewed right out of them. One of them's actually distorted beyond use. So, of course, we couldn't use these. So what we had to do was pull the other side apart and borrow one of these nuts from the other side. And that meant taking both of them off on the other side, cleaning it up. In doing so, the locking tab broke, so we couldn't use the locking tab to hold it on. So we used some Loctite and some high temperature silicone. That gave us one nut. Now we've put it all back together with one nut using a chisel because we didn't have a 52mm. And we're right to go, maybe. It's going to be a two-wheel drive though.
After more than 4 hours hard labour, Ruthie's finally got Milo back on the track. Another fallen tree across the track and another solution. This time, saving the Prado's pride from being dented again. Well, you can't see it here, but it's raining sideways as the boys pay a call on Craig's hut. You might recognise it from the Man from Snowy River movies, which is the perfect theme to end what has been a fantastic four-wheel drive monthly high country adventure.
Well folks, here we are at the end of our high country adventure, and I can tell you what, we have had a ball. Mud bogs, beautiful scenery, and some of the best four-wheel driving I've done. If you get the chance, make sure you get up here. I should make special thanks too to Ant-Man, our Victorian correspondent, who's shown us some of the best bits of his backyard. Until next time, keep the shiny side up.
ARB only sell properly engineered, reliable, quality accessories that represent excellent value. ARB, we won't let you down. Australian Four-Wheel Drive Monthly is Australia's top-selling four-wheel drive magazine. With brilliant destinations, custom Forbies, tips and techniques and new car reviews, Australian 4-Wheel Drive Monthly is a complete package. Subscribe now on 1800 801 647. Australian 4-Wheel Drive Monthly. Go further, go harder.